Hi, Ann.
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing great.
As everyone knows, you are Ann Althouse, the famous blogger.
And law professor.
And law professor. But if it weren't for blogging, you'd be less famous.
I'd be a big nobody. That's right.
You'd be a big nobody. But you're not.
Well, you wouldn't be talking to me. I'd just be another one of the hundreds of law professors.
I would, because you know what? Because I would call you and say, as a law professor, how do you react to the resignation of Eric Holder?
Yeah, you would pick me from among all the law professors to ask about what's up with the resigning of Eric Holder.
Absolutely.
But let's also be clear that you're Bob Wright. As long
we
as
should
doing
introduce
introductions.
me.
Yeah.
Right, because it's not as if I need no introduction. Because I've only appeared on this website 7,000 times or so, and so we should underscore my identity. I'm Robert Wright.
Just trying to get the equality, the out of balance. I feel out of balance, and I'm a very balanced person. I'm a moderate. I'm right there in the middle. I like a feeling of balance.
Right.
But you love falling in love with a messianic figure, and then you come crashing down when he disappoints you. We're talking about Obama, so.
Oh, you're talking about Obama.
Not Holder.
So you're going to dodge. You're going to dodge the Eric Holder question and cut straight to my growing disenchantment with Obama.
Because there's nothing more interesting, Bob, than your feelings. And you loved this man.
I've always felt that way myself.
On Obama.
You're the first person I found who agrees with me on that point, oddly, that there's nothing more important than my feelings. Where were you for the first large number of decades of my life?
Now, we're both married to other people, so.
I know, and speaking of which, your husband's name is Mead, and I assume you're aware.
Drunk on love.
That there's a consulting firm called Althouse and Mead.
Yeah, I have seen
that. That is not you. It is not you, ironically.
Right. They were there first, but somehow they're leveraging themselves off our reputation, perhaps.
I think they are. You type in Althouse in Google, and they're high up there. They weren't before, boy. They should have paid you. Did they pay you to get married? Is there a scandal here?
It's all connected. There are conspiracies everywhere, Bob, and I think we need to
That's what you're good for.
We need to start teasing them out.
We do, and that's what you're good for. I hope you've got some fresh ones for me. But we can start with this growing disenchantment with Obama thing if you want. I noticed that you actually did.
Because look, there's like a war going on. Is it a war? We could talk about whether it's a war. But, Obama, if Bush had done anything like what Obama just started doing this week, or just told us that he was doing this week, if suddenly there was the name of a new terrorist group that we had never heard, but had fortunately been obliterated, but it was worse than ISIS, worse than Al-Qaeda, and it was going to lead to another 9/11, but now it's gone. We're saved from it. If Bush had pulled something like that, or if Bush had started crossing over into the sovereign territory of another country and started dropping bombs on things, people would be going nuts. So we're not seeing that.
One person remains consistent through both administrations, Ann.
Yeah, and that's me.
That would be me.
No, that would be. Oh, well.
No, that would be me.
Well, I was consistent the other way then. So
I complained about both.
Okay.
And I'm complaining about Obama. I've complained in print, in a piece I wrote. I've complained on Twitter, and I will complain more. And you will not. You are falling slowly in love with Obama because he's starting to look more and more like Bush.
There's no love. I'm grimly pragmatic in my observation of politics. I think love belongs in personal life, and falling in love with politicians is an absurd and dangerous thing to do. I don't recommend it. It's a shame that it happened with Obama. But when I voted for Obama, which I did in 2008 but not 12, I did it because I thought it was important for a Democratic that some good would come out of a Democratic president having to look at the war on terror from the inside, having to be responsible for the decisions. And I had supported Bush, so I think that Obama has come around to seeing things from the perspective that Bush had during his time in office, and that some of what we're seeing is vindicating what happened during the Bush administration, and is just grimly necessary stuff that isn't susceptible to the high-minded euphoric optimism that made some people fall in love with Obama in '08. But I wasn't one of the Obama's my boyfriend, Obama's my savior sort of people.
I wasn't a big gusher myself. I was never going, oh, he's so brilliant and everything, and so on. But I had high hopes for him, and they were dashed. And the dashing began, I guess, with the drone strikes, some of which were in violation of international law, and at least in some of which I thought deprived an American citizen of due process. I mean, that's the irony, and maybe you'll agree with me on some of this, although you are slowly growing, I guess not in love with Obama, but in like with him or in approval of him or something. Anyway, nonetheless, I think you may agree with me that he has, ironically, as a former law professor, he has shown a certain disregard for actual law, right?
Well,
I mean, both international law and domestic law.
I think when you say actual law, you're speaking as a layperson. And if you were on the inside as a law professor, as I've been for 30 years, I would say he reminds me very much of a law professor. People on the inside teaching about law don't have these ideas that there are rules that must be followed and we know what they are. It's much more nuanced, to use a word that's popular amongst Democrats, but it's much more ambiguous. And it's much more oriented to reacting to the real world in a practical way. And so if we look at what's been done in a military setting over the years, especially since World War II, the last of the declared wars, it's complicated. And
so you don't think he requires?
I think he is behaving like a law professor. I know a lot of law professors. And I just think that the outsider's view of the law is different from the insider's view, and I think that he's not flagrantly
here's my question.
I think he's acting like a law professor.
Do you not think that constitutionally he required congressional consent to start bombing Syria?
No, because I think, number one, he has first of all, he has an argument these are not questions that ever get resolved in courts. They get resolved in the practical interaction of the different branches. And within that practical interaction, it's not Congress versus the president, and the president has to get Congress's vote every step of the way. There's an interaction between the two. Some of it involves Congress allowing things to happen. Some of it involves Congress speaking to him behind the scenes but not opposing things. Some of it involves a history of Congress having gone along with certain things without objecting to it. And also the president, who is on duty all the time, represents all of us, is required to protect us. He has to do things in the name of national security. He's the commander-in-chief. And the question of what he has to do is something that we've elected him to make decisions about. So if he thinks these things are necessary, if Congress hasn't directly opposed him, which they have.
So you're basically saying there really are no laws in any clear-cut sense. There are no rules. It's all muddled. Who knows? And it seems to me that's just a result. That whole mindset is just a result of past episodes of politicians using sophistry to violate rules, and you've kind of bought into it. I mean,
I'm not saying no. I think that assumes it's all a big discussion about law rather than someone in power needing to respond to things that are happening in the real world and making some judgments about it, being elected to make those judgments. Congress is in a position to respond and to do things, but where Congress doesn't act, members of Congress are going back to try to get reelected. But they spoke to him. There was interaction. You can't assume that Congress is opposed to what he's doing. So there's a middle area, a gray area within which the president has to act to respond to things, to protect us. Supposedly this Corazon group had a plan that they knew about that was going to be like 9/11. Maybe they're lying, but the president is in a position to lie to us continually about all manner of things, and I assume does and needs to a certain extent.
So if Franklin Roosevelt, in going to war against Germany and Japan, had said, I spoke to some people in Congress, trust me on this one, that would have been okay? Instead of getting a formal declaration of war.
What does okay refer to? There's no lawsuit. There's no decision here. We find out what works by living with these institutions of government as they try to make their way in a complicated and difficult world, a dangerous world.
Well, do you believe the word lawful has meaning?
I think that laypersons and people who are not closely involved in the situation would like to turn things into a bunch of rules, at least sometimes. If there were really a system of rules that you imagine, that you fantasize about, if you ever tried to work under them, you wouldn't like them, and you'd be all about breaking them or rewriting them. We have the system that we have, which is flexible and related to reality.
Well, I think the next time your hero, Rush Limbaugh, goes on a diatribe about the corrupting influence of relativism, you should be the example he brings up as what's corrupting America, and that's what I think.
Well, he's not my hero when he says things like, he's not my hero. And I'm not in love with Rush Limbaugh. You're in love with Obama. Let's get to the real relationship here.
I was never in love with Obama, but I'm more. I am. But now that he basically he hasn't replicated, Bush's policy fully, but his current policy is guided by the same confusions that guided Bush's, like basically not understanding blowback. I mean, also a disregard for international law, but not understanding that the nature of the terrorist threat is just different from like a nation state.
There's no nation
that's invading you.
Right.
What?
There's no nation. Yeah. It's more like the times of the pirates or something like that.
Well, in this case, oddly, there is something that resembles a nation, but the fact is that the main threat posed to us by it is the incitement of extremists around the world, including in the United States, who will be incited by a kind of more or less de facto declared war on ISIS.
And Obama really thought that he understood that. That was one of the things he promised to do, that he would understand that what the question of why do they hate us and so forth was something that there was something about his persona, about his higher level of sophisticated intelligence, which was kind of aligned with altruism and with the world of ideas, that somehow when he was in office, he would find ways to do things which, in fact, it turned out he was not able to do. And now he's behaving more like Bush. And, it must be difficult for people who hated Bush to see Bush vindicated like this.
But again, I mean, even with when he started the drone strikes and used them more prolifically than Bush had been using them, even back then he was demonstrating, I think, incomprehension about what actually drives a terrorist threat. Even then, we were taking extremist groups that had local grievances in Yemen or wherever, had primarily local grievances, and turning us into their enemy by, in violation of international law, dropping bombs on them. And it was a violation of international law because, in general, we did not have the expressed consent of the government. Even if in some cases we have the tacit consent, which, by the way, we actually have in the case of Syria.
Shouldn't that be within the range of techniques that we can use to talk to the government of Yemen or whatever and not do things overtly, but to be able to handle things in a more subtle way? I mean, you keep saying the rules of international law like you really believe it, but I think that we see what the law is through experience, through how it's really used by people who are put to these difficult tests. Now, I think the practical question of whether doing everything from the air and so-called leading from behind is actually working, I think that, in addition to let's be different in a way that will make them actually like us, the idea that we can use our superior air power and we can keep our people off the ground so that we never get hurt and we just zoom in there and do things from the air, and then that's effective, and then their people on the ground, the good people on the ground, will somehow do the dirty work and take the casualties, and they'll want to do that with help from us. That there's some sophisticated way to do that, but that's about military tactics. That's not about law. I mean, if you want to say, but there's a legal problem with that, then we'd go down a different line. But I'd like to talk about just whether practically that's been working, or whether Obama has come to learn this kind of sad reality that we can't just do everything from the air, from the distance. And, it's interesting to me that...
Well, he hasn't admitted that yet.
It's interesting to me that we had this sort of physical distance, doing things from the air or doing things from behind, and then we also had this sort of moral or intellectual distance that we're thinking in terms of altruism and higher ideas and whether people view us with respect and so on, these abstractions. So there's all of this distance. To me, it connects with the persona of Obama, who maybe could be said to be aloof or professorial or something like that. It's sort of like the big problem, the overarching problem of Obama, or the story, the tragedy of Obama. And I'm saying that not in criticism of him, but actually kind of feeling for him. And feeling for us as we kind of attached to him and felt a connection to what he was trying to do, and then had to live through the experience of how it didn't work. And then we have to look back to the previous President Bush, who was kind of the figure that we enjoyed hating and thought was a crude cowboy and was brutal. Then we look back to that and we see that in a new light. I mean, I think that's an amazing narrative or drama.
Well,
of course,
I'm no
notice how I'm being
not,
professorial in distance, because I'm seeing it as kind of a story or a theatrical drama.
Don't say we are looking at Bush in a new light. My view of Bush remains unchanged. My view of Obama gets dimmer as he commits more and more of the same kind of, intellectual mistakes that Bush committed, even though the policies on the ground are not exactly identical. Mm-hmm. And by the way, one thing you said, well, wow, if Bush had done this, bombing a country, a sovereign country, there would have been, what happened when he invaded Iraq? There was an uproar. Well, those are very different things. I mean, the bombing of Syria, although technically a violation of international law, had the tacit consent of the government of Syria. So it's not like sending a bunch of troops in.
So tacit works.
It's not like a real invasion.
Well, the invasion of Iraq, we had gone to the UN. We had gone to the Security Council.
But we didn't get approval. Ann. So that's why it was a violation of international law. So there was active opposition by members of the Security Council who had a veto, active opposition to the war. That did not get, the last president who really fairly fastidiously abided by international law was, can you fill in the blank? George Bush the Elder. When he did the Persian Gulf War, he got Security Council support. He had been ambassador to the UN. He had some respect for the institution. He demonstrated more of it than Bill Clinton did, or than his son did, or than Obama has.
So there wasn't a vote against. What was the actual resolution in the Security Council?
We didn't even. There had been a resolution.
There was a proposed resolution, and I'm reading from Wikipedia.
There had been a resolution authorizing.
So they didn't. It wasn't a vote against it, but he at least went. He at least went farther than Obama has gone. So that's the reason not to go to the UN then. So that
I don't think he actually brought it up for a vote at the UN.
Right, because the veto was in the offing.
Yeah, because France was opposed.
To the UN. This wasn't presented to the UN.
Neither one was. Bush didn't present it for a vote. There was a prior UN resolution that, he probably claimed somehow authorizes, just as Obama is ridiculously kind of claiming that, these 2002 and 2003 authorizations for the use of military force in Congress justify bombing Syria. But no, Bush did not bring it, as I recall, to an actual vote in the Security Council.
Bush did more than Obama has done here. Although Iraq was obviously, we were on the ground, we were doing a major invasion.
That was a true invasion.
In a different way.
Yeah, it was a bigger deal. Anyway,
I think it's clear. If Bush had done what Obama is doing now, the outcry, the protest, the criticism in the media would be much greater. And that Obama is largely getting a pass here. We were assuming he's doing something that needs to be done. Aren't we? Who's criticizing?
I'm not. Oh, there's a certain amount of... it's odd. What there is a lot of people saying, man, I don't know if this is going to work.
So it's about whether it works.
The full-throated criticism, no, you're right. It's a minority involving, me and, I don't know, Glenn Greenwald and a few other people. I don't know. Is that
where you want to be? Is that where you are?
I have a lot of respect for Glenn Greenwald. And I think he's right about this. I don't agree with him on everything.
Yeah, if there really were, if this Corazon group that apparently we destroyed the leadership of, if they really had a plot that we knew about that was equivalent to 9/11 and it was in the works, and we obliterated it. Well, we don't get to see that that would have happened, so we're just asked to believe, and I assume that President Bush and President Obama over the years have saved us from things that we didn't get to see. There hasn't been another 9/11. When do they get credit for that? Or, it's easy to complain about the things you can see that they're doing, but they need to protect us, and we value that. If we don't have the, if we don't give them our imagination of what would have happened if they hadn't acted, then every time they do something, we can be critical of everything that they do. But there's a reason they're doing what they do. Now, some people think the reason is the next election or some other such thing, but I assume they're acting on real intelligence about threats to the United States.
Oh, I think more or less that's true. I think the problem is they're naturally incentivized to think about the short term. Obama really doesn't want a big attack on America over the next 2 years while he's president. That's natural for a politician. But then that leads you to do things that plant the seeds for more of a threat further down the road.
But how could you possibly have a better opinion about what's in our long-term interests than he has? I mean, I don't want to be overly sheep-like and just accept he's doing his best, whatever he does. He has more information than me. He must think it's a good decision. Why would I think my decision was better than
I'm not.
How
No, but that's not my argument.
Why do
that's
you
not my argument.
Know?
My argument isn't that I understand more clearly than he does what's in our long-term interest, although I increasingly suspect that a number of us do, as my view of his judgment dims. But what I'm saying is not that. I'm saying his incentives lead him to focus on the short run and do things that will stop a big attack on the U.S. in the short run without paying due attention to the long-term blowback. It's like Bush. It's like, he thought invading Iraq was, I don't know what the hell motivated that. But in any event, look at the long-term consequences.
Well, what are the long-term consequences the
ISIS
other way around?
ISIS would not be here if Bush hadn't invaded Iraq. Before, that is where it metastasized in the Iraq War. It had been a tiny little thing, I think in Jordan, focused on local grievances about the Jordanian government. And then the war in Iraq happens, and all of a sudden it's an al-Qaeda affiliate, and it's growing. And ISIS, this whole mess would not be with us, Ann, if George Bush had not invaded Iraq.
I agree. It would be a different mess. But what would the other mess have been? You don't know. I mean,
I've got a feeling it wouldn't be nearly on this scale.
But the first Bush's Gulf War ended inconclusively. And it really continued throughout the Clinton administration. It was never resolved. Something would have...
Yeah, it was resolved. It was totally resolved. We went to war because he invaded Kuwait. The war led him to withdraw from Kuwait, so mission accomplished.
So do you wish that Saddam Hussein had remained in office and we'd been continuing to... Well, we were flying military missions. There was a no-fly zone and so forth. The people of Iraq were suffering. The Kurds and so forth. You would rather you like to think that down that road things were prettier. The road not taken. What was down there?
I think that's a good guess. Given the level of suffering the Iraqis have suffered since the invasion, I think that's a pretty good guess. Yes.
That it would have been better, but the president.
Not to mention.
It seems to me the president has to make a decision. There's bad things down both paths, and has to choose a path. And trying to make it good. Now, President Bush went out of office. Obama came in, and he was maybe over-enthusiastic about ending our having anyone in a position to get killed in Iraq, and took us out too quickly, didn't make the proper arrangements that would have been needed to keep us there and to keep things stable. And then the instability was created. But now that's Obama's problem. He has to fix that, or attempt to do something. I mean,
that's the other thing, is that we had to do something big here. I mean, did we? It's funny. Every time a bigger threat emerges, we realize that the prior threat wasn't, it's like I don't know. If we saw a real threat to America right now, A real threat? A real threat to America's security? Like, whoa, this is existential? We'd be going like, wow, I can't believe we were so freaked out about ISIS. That wasn't an actual threat to the American homeland.
In other words, if Khorasan had actually got its act together in time and hit us in a 9/11 type way, we'd be saying, why were we talking about... We would
First of all,
forget about ISIL and move on to Khorasan.
And this is with all due respect, this is an example of the kind of hysteria that the administration has helped foster. You said if Khorasan had hit us in a 9/11 kind of way, what Khorasan is apparently up to is an attempt to bring down a single airliner, which is a tragedy, but it's not 9/11, okay? And that's what I mean. Is that really an existential threat to America? I'm not saying don't do anything about Khorasan. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying let's put things in perspective. Is it an existential threat to the United States if a single airliner goes down? No. Now, it is increasingly like an existential threat if everyone freaks out and says, let's do something crazy in response that will make more and more things like this likely.
Or if 50 airlines crash on the same day.
Well, yeah, but, you know, and this is, in a way, my biggest disappointment with Obama in the context of this ISIS thing. It seems to me that post 9/11, more than ever, the job of the president should be to keep fear from getting out of hand. And in the case of ISIS, he did the exact opposite. I mean, listen to the things his administration said. Chuck Hagel said crazy stuff. This is a threat to every interest we have, an imminent threat to every interest we have. Manifestly nuts, manifestly crazy thing to say. Kerry said, you know, pure evil and blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. The administration was involved in whipping up hysteria, the exact opposite of what a responsible post 9/11 president should do.
Well, why do you think...
And that's where Obama is such a disappointment.
Of what Obama had previously been oriented to doing. So if he's come around to speaking in those terms, why would he do that unless he was really responding to reality? Do you think he was doing that because of the upcoming election? And a concern that the Republicans were going to have a big wave election because
I don't know.
They were more
I don't know.
Trusted on national security things? That was one of the issues? Do you think it's all about the election? I mean, speaking of Rush Limbaugh, I think that's what Rush Limbaugh was saying.
I don't know. I mean, it could be partly in the sense that it could be partly a response to perceived political pressure.
Well, why do you think he's doing? If you think he's just whipping up hysteria, which is what you said, why is he doing it? Why do you think?
Because, here is the logic. Here is the logic. I mean, first of all, it could be that Hagel and Kerry were kind of half freelancing. I don't know. I sometimes think he doesn't have very tight control on his administration. But, you know, and that, you know, Kerry was trying to lead Obama from behind or something. I don't know. But if you assume that this was an orchestrated messaging operation on the part of the administration, then presumably they had decided they wanted to do something big like declare de facto war on ISIS, and they wanted to pave the way for that. That's what presidents do.
Why did they want to do that?
Whenever presidents decide they're going to go to war, they try to terrify people and maximize the scale of the threat. That's what political leaders do.
They try to drum up support however they can.
Yeah.
Just like what we said, weapons of mass destruction for Bush's era.
Right, exactly. Just the way Bush did.
They don't tell us 100% why they're really doing it. They may be telling us part of why they're doing it. So if they did it, then they had a reason to do it, which they may or may not have told us. So since Bush is kind of changing from his previous orientation toward the war on terror, he must have a reason, right? So what's the reason?
Well, Obama, I can only speculate. I think this is, and again, I'm not necessarily talking about in my mind, conscious and unconscious motivation of politicians and the rest of us are kind of hard to disentangle sometimes, and I think you kind of agree on that. But
but if you had to make up a story, if you were writing a coherent story about why this is happening from
look, I think it was partly a response. You got to remember, he has been hounded relentlessly, largely by the right, including neocons, but also somewhat by liberal interventionists, about being weak, about failing to get involved in Syria. Then he draws this red line, and he doesn't follow through. And then there was a little of this around Ukraine, although the truth is there was basically nobody in America who's very enthusiastic about a military intervention in Ukraine, so it's kind of not clear what they wanted him to do. But anyway, there's been a lot of hounding him for being weak. I think the opinion polls showed that they considered him not strong on national security, not that strong on terrorism. And so I think there was political pressure to do something. Now, whether he responded to it in a coldly calculated, cynical way, or whether it was operating more at an unconscious level, and he really believes at a conscious level that this is the right thing to do for the nation, I don't know. But I do think political pressure probably played a role. Although I will say,
You think it was meant? You suggested it was a distraction from what's going on in the Ukraine, and it really is about Putin and all of that.
No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there was a kind of a somewhat vague and relentless drumbeat for him to be more of a man. Although I will say at the same time that his use of drone strikes all along suggests to me that we shouldn't think of this as really a radical change of course for him, because it seems to me the logic of this is, in my mind, confused in the same way that the logic of the drone strikes of the pretty prolific use of drone strikes was. So in that sense, this isn't a big change. His main determination, you might say, in terms of being different from Bush, I think has been, don't get us involved in a big war. And he has convinced himself, I think, that this is consistent with that because there's not boots on the ground. And that is a big distinction. It is a big distinction. But I don't think we should think of this as necessarily a road to Damascus experience, because in a way it's consistent with the previous years of his administration.
Now, you suggested that I'm going to bring in a seemingly trivial piece of evidence that got a lot of talk in the blogosphere and the news this week, was the latte salute, getting off, right?
Yeah, so he's holding coffee, and he
saluting with
and he's coming off the plane, and there's these soldiers you're supposed to salute, so he holds up his.
And his people released that photograph, so it's not like somebody caught it and oops, he shouldn't.
That was kind of dumb. So
here's my question: If he did that and put out the picture of himself doing that, that kind of undercuts your argument that he needed to do something to look like more of a man, that the Republicans were making him look like a pussy, and he had to get some macho stuff out there. If so, why did he put the... to me, this little shred of maybe trivial evidence, I think it was a completely trivial incident, really, but they put that photograph out of him like kind of lamely saluting with a coffee cup in his hand. He doesn't seem to be about trying to convince people that he's macho. I don't see that.
But you tell me, I don't listen to Rush and I don't watch Fox, so you tell me, what exactly was the critique that this was showing disrespect for our men in uniform, or what? What was the critique?
I didn't listen to Rush that much this week, but I think that the point is that he doesn't respect the military, that he's...
But see, that's kind of confused, because the logic of the salute...
But you're saying he's trying to make a show of his macho.
No, I don't think that was calculated. I think that just happened. But let me say, I think
it was calculated to release the picture, because it wasn't just caught by some photographer. It was his own people that put that photograph out. They thought it.
Who knows? It could have been a mistake, but I doubt they cleared it with him. But so it could have just been a bad judgment. But let me just say something about salutes.
I'm just using this to undermine your. He felt the urge to make a show of his manliness. Obama and manliness is one of my long-standing topics. I have a tag on that. I could go do a whole mining of the archive on the subject of Obama and manliness. I think you could write a whole book on that topic. So I'm very interested in that. Yeah.
Before we get to Obama and manliness, which I promise we'll get to, because, well, we'll get to this. I do want to, as an Army brat, I want to say something about salutes and why the critique of this is disrespectful is kind of confused. I saw a lot of salutes. I lived on Army bases, and I saw my father return salutes. Because on an Army base, it used to be like this, probably discipline's broken down. You know, my father was an officer, he's a colonel. If he's walking around, every enlisted man who encounters him has to salute him.
So it's
and he returns the salute. But the respect is in one direction. It's not like returning the salute in a crisp way is his sign of respect. The only sense in which respect is involved here is the initial salute by the lower ranking guy. So it's not like my father could have been, you know, like a sloppy salute on my father's part would have been taken as an egregious sign of disrespect. That's not the idea of a salute. The idea of a salute is to reinforce the line of authority symbolically.
And to make everybody's favorite analogy, don't forget that Hitler, when he did the Hitler salute kind of with his hand back like this, in a way that was sort of
casual,
limp-wristed, to use an old expression.
Well,
so
yeah, but
the idea that the person, the big leader, doesn't salute the same way as his minions.
Yeah,
is it
right. I mean,
why
that's
is he
true.
saluting at all?
Although the weird thing about Hitler is, if you look at his oratorical style, it was actually kind of a feat generally, right? Have you ever looked at his? It wasn't the typical, you know, war leader kind of. Don't you think? I mean, never. We don't need to get into Hitler or Kana, but
I just spent the summer reading the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which has a lot of analysis of things like that, and I think he did a lot of speeches that were just hours and hours long that people were thrilled by. But I think some of it was analyzing things and analyzing criticisms that other people made of him and acting like the other people were clownish. I don't know. There's so much to go through there. It's hard to make a generalization, but certainly he did a lot of yelling and screaming with the gestures. That, you know, there's those videos of him practicing his manly gestures and so forth.
Oh, really? Practicing them?
Practicing like the way we practice our faces and gestures in front of the mirror. Yeah, practicing gestures that would read to. Obviously, you had to project to a big crowd. You're just some little dot. How do you make the crowd see your physicality? I don't know. He made a certain kind of gestures.
Well, he was certainly animated in his speeches, and it was certainly effective. But on this issue of Obama's manliness or manhood, what's your take on this?
I think that he's sometimes criticized for not being macho enough. I think he has a style that's more of a New Age man, that's a little bit more feminine. Remember Joan Rivers accused, before she died, all our accusations come before we die, but she very recently, before dying, said he was gay and that Michelle was a tranny. So there's some kind of, that works as a joke because people have a sense that
I think with a certain crowd it works as a joke. I don't think I would be rolling on the floor if I were in the
Joan
audience.
Rivers' audience was liberal people. She was transgressive for that reason. But anyway, I think a lot of people characterize him as kind of effete or feminine in certain ways, in a good way. He's like a law professor to me. That's what I see. He's more intellectual. He's quieter. He cares a lot about how women feel. He doesn't act warlike, and even when he goes to war, I think he projects. He does the theater of thoughtfulness, right? He's thoughtful, right? And people think that he thinks. He's careful. He's not a cowboy.
Well, thoughtful
right?
isn't the
Bush
same
had
as
this masculinity style that was talked about a lot. The way he walked, the way he talked. He was repeatedly called a cowboy, and then that was connected to his foreign policy. But Obama has a different style, and it's not the stereotypical old-fashioned masculinity style. And I think that he's proud of the way he's out and proud about his mellower, more thoughtful, calm, no drama Obama. Does anyone say that anymore? Style.
I don't think that's as apt.
Some of his enemies act like he's just a big wuss or something like that because of that. So that might have something to do with wanting to go to war to prove his masculinity, which I'm only talking about because you said it. You said that, Bob.
I said what? What did I say?
That he needed to do something to prove his masculinity. That he may have felt. No. I asked you why.
I didn't say he needed to. I said there was the perception that he needed to.
Well, so my question was, why is he doing this, if not because he genuinely, on the information that he has, believes that this is needed, this is the best choice for protecting American Americans and for protecting American interests. What's the alternate theory? There has to be some reason for what he's doing. And you brought up that he may have thought he needed to prove his masculinity.
Well, I didn't say whether I thought that was working so much at a conscious level or an unconscious level, but I think this may be partly response to all the heat he had taken about being not a strong enough leader. Not exactly the same as not being masculine. I will say, I don't think.
Yeah, but you did say macho. You did connect strong leader to being
well, okay. Yeah, they're not unrelated. I mean, on that front, in terms of things, video images that should be released and shouldn't be released, I will say that although Obama's golf swing has gotten better, especially in the early years, I really don't think that the White House should have released footage of it. Because it really,
I didn't even look at that one.
You're not a golfer, but I mean,
he also is bad at throwing.
It really reinforced. What's that?
He's also bad at throwing out the first pitch in baseball.
I haven't seen his motion. And
he also looks.
I haven't seen his throwing.
He also looks dorky on a bike. You know, so the sports that he doesn't. Remember, people like to think of him playing basketball, and then there was the time when he missed repeatedly. So he doesn't look masculine. Doing
well, we can't help the way we look by and large, you know, but we can help what video we release, and I'm telling you, that golf swing is a mixed blessing.
Maybe that was
Bill Clinton had a very good golf swing. What's that?
Maybe it's the best they had. You should have seen the shots they didn't use.
But, you know, wait, golf. Speaking of golf, Ann, this is another thing that really does disappoint me about him, and this has come through, and it's become part of the conventional wisdom, but he doesn't schmooze. It's almost like he takes people's affection for granted and doesn't think he has to work at it. You know, there's this famous stat that of all the times he's played golf, an incredibly small number of the outings have involved like somebody from Congress. Well, the whole point of golf, a large part of it, is to bond with fellow elites, right? That's why the ruling class invented it, you know? I mean, so it's just kind of crazy. I mean, you know, president is an important job. Your time is precious. To spend all this time on the golf course, and golf is perfectly conducive to building bonds with people, including people on the other side of the aisle, and to not use the time that way is just really derelict.
Well, but why can't he use the time to relax and clear his mind?
Relax in 2 years, for God's sake. You got a country to run.
I think he needs some downtime. He goes on a lot of vacations. He has a lot of concerts at the White House.
Hey,
he
but
does
you
a
know
lot
what?
Of things like that.
But here's the thing.
Do you want to criticize him for that, or do you want to say we're so reliant on his decisions that we want him to remain sane and grounded and human? And maybe he's more the introvert type than most people who would end up in politics. I mean, I think the sort of
first of all,
Obama's psyche is an interesting subject. I keep trying to bring us back to that. But I think that he is someone who has been so liked by other people who have political ambition and who maybe pushed him forward. He's just been able to move forward fantastically by being someone that other people like. They just already like him. Maybe he doesn't. He's not that well equipped to push himself forward and make himself liked when people decide that they're not going to like him. Maybe that's puzzling for him. He doesn't have a lot of resources there.
I also think he spent much of his pre-presidential and certainly pre-political life in environments where esteem was just easier to come by for somebody who fit his profile. At Harvard Law School, in generally liberal circles, he's going to be beloved. But this is different. You know, you're president now.
He didn't go into legal practice where he had to really fight with opponents and make things work. You're cosseted in the law school environment. I mean, I enjoy it. It allows you to be relaxed and to think about things and to have a sort of measured, balanced sort of attitude. I can really identify with him in that regard. I think he's a different kind of person than would normally ever be able to make it to president. You have to be more of a fighter. You have to be more like Hillary Clinton, who he bested, because maybe we rankled at some things about her, but she has more the personality type that you would normally expect from a politician.
Well, since she's going to be the next Democratic nominee, maybe we should talk about her. Although before we leave Obama, I would say you can relax while playing golf with other people some of whom are in Congress, okay? I mean, it can still be relaxing. Now, there may be some people on the other side of the aisle that he dislikes so much that it would be a stressful experience, but he could have made much better use of his golf time. I'm sorry.
He's not that kind. I think that the point is, since it could have been used so much better, all the more reason to see why he's not that kind of person. He's not a schmoozer.
Eisenhower used his golf outings that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He played with the Speaker of the House or whoever he played with, but Obama is not, and Eisenhower wasn't a Bill Clinton level schmoozer, you know, but still, he used.
Eisenhower got criticized for golfing. I grew up in the I was born in 1951.
I know.
So the first thing I ever remember about the president, it was
standard liberal
Eisenhower,
critique,
and it was that he was always golfing. That was the one thing that came across to me at the time.
Right. Well, my thesis advisor in college was Eisenhower revisionist. Fred Greenstein at Princeton, who was pointing out that actually he was more active behind the scenes than people appreciated, and one thing he did was use his golf time for political purposes.
And another reason for doing it that way is it looks like you're not high-powered and always about politics, but you actually are. So it's just like it is with business. You can be relaxing, not doing business, but you're still doing business. Some people like to do that, mix business and pleasure. And some people feel like it's not pleasure if it's still business. Don't make it business. I want to be with people I actually like. I want to relax.
And one thing that worries me is like we're pretty far. We're well more than halfway through this conversation, and I don't think you've said anything completely crazy yet. And traditionally, you
try to make me do it, Bob. It's always
that's
there.
The thing. It's
just under the surface. All you have to do is push the right button, and I might say something really weird.
Yeah, well. You know, you've been treating this like an interview of me or something. Like the goal is to get me to say things I'll regret, and I don't think I have yet. But you're gonna use the video to go ahead.
Maybe I'll pick out your worst clips, lowlights of Bob Wright. That's my agenda here. No, so so go ahead.
Well, I know you like. I know you like this idea of me like turning on Obama, although it's been a much more gradual disenchantment.
Not just you, but just generally that people were so in love with him, and he was the object of that love. So it was an experience for him too. And then what happens when all of that ends? What happens when you fall out of love with the person you were in love with? So there was too much love in the first place. I don't believe in loving politicians. I think we should be more grounded and grim about politics and should give love to people we know in real life, to our loved ones, our real loved ones, and be a little more skeptical of politicians. But if we're going to throw ourselves into loving this guy, it's not really going to work out that well in the end, and it shouldn't have. So we're learning something. We're learning from this experience. Maybe we'll get a better boyfriend later.
Well, I don't think... I'm wondering how many liberals are going into the next election cycle in love with Hillary. God knows she has a lot of support.
But see, that's the argument for her. Enough of this love. That doesn't belong here.
It's more like a sense. It's more like a sense of inevitability.
Well, that didn't work the previous time. So people react. I think people don't like to feel that it's inevitable. That if it's already a done deal, it's like, well, let's mix things up. I want anything else to happen. I'm for the underdog now. I think Obama worked that feeling in us. You started rooting for Obama just because I don't want to be told what's going to happen so far in advance. I don't like this sense that she's already designated when we haven't voted yet. And that can just prepare us to be for somebody else. The problem this time is there's nobody else to put in there and compete with her. Who else could there possibly be? There aren't enough good candidates out there. I think it's scary.
You're not going with that guy from Vermont, huh? What's his name? I'm sorry.
Who's the guy? Who are we talking about?
Oh,
Bernie Sanders?
Yeah.
Oh, well, he's a socialist, isn't he? I want someone. I'm a moderate. I want a moderate person who can be trusted.
I don't know. I saw a headline about Jim Webb. Remember him?
Well, he's a little nutty.
Is he?
That's ridiculous.
Oh. So who is there? I mean, Biden apparently not happening, we think?
I think Biden is a ridiculous choice.
You've used that word twice now. Who could we mention?
This should be some governor who's established a good record.
Scott
what's his
Walker.
Name in
whoops,
Maryland?
wrong party.
What's the guy in Maryland? Malloy? What's the Maryland governor's name?
I don't keep up. I can barely remember Chris Christie's name, and I live in New Jersey.
Wait, the governor of Maryland is Martin O'Malley.
Sounds great. Sign me up.
Look for Martin O'Malley. Give Martin O'Malley a chance. M-O-M.
Okay.
Mom.
That's good. Give mom a chance. That cannot fail as a slogan.
Mom
all we
president.
are saying is give mom a chance.
Yeah.
This is America. This is gonna work. But what you think you do think Hillary is inevitable? And you like Hillary, right? You like Hillary.
Nope.
You like Hillary.
Well, first of all, she's old, so who knows if she'll be up for it when the time comes.
How old is she?
Could take a turn for the worse.
She's not that old. What is she, in her 60s? Late 60s? What? She's not that old.
I think she's 68 or 69.
I think that's a sexist thing to say. I think if she were a man, you would not say that's old.
Oh, we sure said it about Reagan when he was that old.
Reagan was like 100. Reagan was like 160. Ann, give me a break. Reagan. How old was Reagan when he was late? He was older than Hillary.
When he was first elected, he was the same age that Hillary is.
No, is that true?
Yeah, look it up. I've already checked this. Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, anyway, 69 is the new 59.
Well, it depends on the individual's health and vitality and so on.
Yeah.
I have a problem
women live longer
back
than men.
Bill Clinton. I don't think Bill Clinton should be back in the White House. I think we have term limits for a reason, and I don't accept the spouse of a previous president who's already served 2 terms going back into the White House. That just rubs me the wrong way. It's like a workaround around the term limit on the president. I don't think someone should. I don't think Bill Clinton should be back in the White House.
Do you?
And I don't want the first woman president to be someone that got there in the sort of Lurleen Wallace way, where she got her prominence through her husband. I want to see the woman that got there on her own.
Was it Loreen or Laura Lean? Which did you say?
Lurleen Wallace.
Lurleen Wallace.
George Wallace.
Yeah. George's wife, totally. There he was shot, right?
Well, I think he term limited out, didn't he, or whatever. Anyway, there was no reason why there were a lot of examples of women coming into power back then, where they were there as the wife of the man who had been in power. Now, it might be that Bill Clinton got where he got because he had her as the power and brains behind him. So he might have gotten where he got because of her. In which case, then she's entitled to come back and get what's hers. Too much power for the Clintons. That's too much, in my view. We want something new and fresh, I think.
Well, the thing about 7 people on the Democratic left, the 7 people on the Democratic left who care about foreign policy are concerned about is that Hillary sounds kind of like neocon light when she talks about foreign policy. She bonds with the Kagans and so on. And that leads to the question, is there any chance at all, given this whole Rand Paul thing, and I personally have kind of a dim view of him, but is there any chance at all that we can wind up with a situation where the Republican candidate is the dove? Is there any chance? I don't think there is any chance.
Well, I think that if Rand Paul is kind of trying to position himself to run, and I think he's moderating his previously isolationist kind of. It's
just making him look increasingly incoherent. Everything he says contradicts something he said within the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. So,
Well, he's a strange character. I think he's kind of too weird to be accepted. But
I think he's weird. I don't think he's smart. I don't think he's as smart. I don't think he's as smart as his father either. Although his father is eccentric in certain ways too. But
his father is so weird.
Yeah, I know. But I don't think. I just think the whole Paul phenomenon is kind of overblown in a way.
And I think Ted Cruz isn't a good candidate.
Oh, God help us. Help us.
He's like an attack dog kind of a person. He's too extreme. I just think
he's a bad man.
People won't trust him to make decisions for everybody.
That guy is Joe McCarthy all over again.
This is not an original point. I think it's good to have him in the mix as a senator, but he's just too much of a real oppositional lawyer type person. I don't think that is what we need for a president.
If he is elected president, I am moving to Vermont and I'm going to join the secession movement. Mark my word.
Well, that's extreme of you, Bob, since you like extremists, apparently.
If Ted Cruz...
You're just encouraging the
I will not live in a country run by Ted Cruz. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I remember when people said if Bush was going to get elected, they were all going to move to Canada. Remember all the threats in 2004 to...
Yeah, but the funny thing is, on foreign policy, Bush ran as a realist, not a neocon. Little did we know.
Right. Well, little did we know 9/11 was going to happen, and then that had to be responded to. Obviously, that completely changed Bush and made him have a wholly different approach to foreign policy than he had previously stated. So, what do you think Gore would have done? I always assumed that Gore would have done pretty much the same thing Bush did.
It might not have been as different as I would hope. I don't know.
I don't think it would have been. I think maybe it was actually the intelligent response, and the Democrats could stand back and criticize
it was not the intelligent response.
Reasons, but if they had been in power, and this was one of the reasons I wanted Obama to be in power, so that the Democratic Party would have to face up to these things and take responsibility for it. So I think the answer is,
I think the actual accurate answer is, Gore almost certainly would have invaded Afghanistan, and he probably would not have invaded Iraq. That's what I think the answer is.
Well,
but
then
I don't
Iraq
know.
would have continued to be a problem that would have needed to be dealt with in some way.
Like what? What kind of problem? In what sense? He didn't even have a nuclear weapons program. What was he going to do? Well, remind me what threat this was about?
There was continual fighting that was left over, that had never been resolved after the first Gulf War.
He was perfectly contained. He was in his little box, not causing any trouble.
At what point do you think we should interfere because some dictator is doing horribly cruel things to his own people? What's your position on Syria?
Well, I mean, if the question had been whether to intervene back when Saddam Hussein was gassing Kurds, that would be a different question. But that was all in the past. It's not like you could save those lives by invading in 2003. And there was nothing comparable going on in Iraq when he did invade. I mean, look, it was a brutal dictatorship, but there's a number of those around, and we can only do so much.
If Gore had been president, he would have been privy to all the information that Bush had, and he would have responded to that in some way. Everything would have been different. So
you didn't have to invade Iraq. You didn't have to invade Iraq. You had to invade Afghanistan almost as a political matter, even though that hasn't worked out well. But yet you pretty much had to do it, but not Iraq. Not Iraq. That was a manufactured crisis.
We'll never get to see what would have happened in the alternate. Where did I see an article recently? Somebody was writing the value of alternate history. Should we do alternate history? I mean, I don't know. It's tough. What I object to is people doing alternate history where they imagine in the alternative everything would be much better. Why? It just seems like a political argument when you assume things.
Yeah, you don't know for sure, but ISIS as we know it would not be here if Bush hadn't invaded Iraq. I know that.
You don't know that.
I know that.
Something you know. Something else that might be worse would be there. You can't
That's possible.
have a fantasy about
it's possible.
About the alternative.
So, Anne, we're approaching an hour. Will you please say something controversial before we go? What do you think of this Ray Rice thing?
Well, I have a sort of a overarching view that making football the main issue. Like I was watching the Sunday morning talk shows last week, and there was all this material about Syria and Iraq that was very important and hot, and people like Dianne Feinstein were being asked about football, and we're taking it all very serious, like football as an overarching thing. It's a component of the war on women. It's being used to leverage the war on women. Obviously, any given person who commits an act of violence, commits a crime, needs to be dealt with appropriately, and we can talk about whether Rice was given too easy of a deal or Goodell's original suspension wasn't harsh enough. But what's going on is this larger thing of using football generally to make some big generic statements and stereotypical statements about men and violence and protecting women, as if football is all about women.
Okay, but don't you
think... And I think that that's political and absurd, and it's just a generated issue for political purposes.
But don't you think that stars in general, celebrities, football players, whatever, people of prominence inherently exert a greater influence on our values and norms than just these people you've never heard of, right? So there is greater consequence in the question of how you deal with crimes committed by these people, right? Because it has a larger influence on the value system of the nation.
Remember when we had a long conversation about Tiger Woods, you and me?
Yeah. And that's a very good example.
Do you remember I disagreed with you about that?
Right. You're like, hey, Tiger gonna be Tiger.
Also I said having celebrities, especially actors and sports people. These people are going to do a lot of things wrong. A lot of them have their various emotional issues, and they're not the best people. To make them into heroes in the first place is a character flaw on our part. We shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be inviting kids to do that. But
it's going to happen.
That sports stars can be heroes for children, I think that's nice. But there's a long history of people like that not being role models.
But no, sports heroes are always going to be role models for young people. It's just kind of built into human nature. It's built into being a young person.
Well, then leave it to sports as far as how to be a good husband, how to be a good member of the community.
Well, the commissioner of the NFL is part of sports. That's what this is about. How should sports deal with high-profile people who do things that we want to discourage broadly in society? And the answer being posited is harshly, which makes sense to me.
Well, maybe.
Now, by the way, Tiger Woods, it was not comparable because the question wasn't should he be punished. He didn't do anything that you would expect the golfing authorities to punish him for. But anyway.
And he stood to lose a lot. Well, Goodell makes $44 million a year. What's up with that? I feel like if you make $44 million a year, you should be doing an outstanding job. So I would say get that guy out of there and let Condi Rice be the commissioner of football.
He really makes that much money? Are you serious?
That's what I keep hearing. That's the number I keep hearing. See,
I don't even make that much money.
He needs to do a better job to earn that much money. He should be doing something superhuman.
I mean, which would you say is better run, Blogging Heads TV or the NFL, Ann? I think the answer's obvious. No, I mean, seriously.
I think
if he's going to make $46 million, I think the implications for my salary are clear.
I think there's too much of stereotyping of male athletes, men, about football, trying to make football seem like it's bad, and that's gone too far. Of course, it's Goodell's job to try to maintain the image of football, and if he has to pick on some individuals who deserve, not pick on them, but isolate and punish some individuals who are hurting the image of football, then I think that's important to do. But I think it's important to do because there shouldn't be an overall stereotype that men who play football are animals, are thugs, or brutes.
No. It's just that when I would say anyone
some people are trying to completely end football and destroy football. I used to be one of them. I used to want football to end. This has got to stop. But I was about 16 at the time. I'm used to it. I think football, great American sport. People love it. And yeah, you can get injured. And yeah, some of the people who do it are not the most self-controlled, emotionally stable people, and they make mistakes. And they should
I'm not calling
with due process.
I want to be clear. I am not calling for the criminalization of football.
Some people are saying, would you let your own son play football?
Well, as a matter of injury risk, that's, I don't know. Because I had two daughters, I didn't confront that question. The funny thing, and we really should, we're over an hour, but the funny thing is that you don't hear more about soccer because I think there's actually pretty good evidence to believe that all these kids playing soccer, they may be doing brain damage by hitting the ball with their head, and I think they still do that in youth soccer, don't they?
Soccer has more head injuries. You have the repeated...
Why are parents, you would think that these American parents who are so concerned about everything's implications for the health of their kids... You would think there'd be... I'm just kind of surprised we're not hearing more about that.
People are not that scientific, and they like to think that soccer is sort of European and wholesome, and girls can play it, and everybody's out there running around, and they're not people are not that scientific. They like to think they are, but they're pretty emotional, and they have a little bit of science spiked into their emotionality, and they should be more sensible.
Yeah. I'm with
a
you
voice
there.
of reason and sensibility and not getting too emotional.
So, Anne, we should go.
Sorry.
I ill-advisedly lined up 2 dialogues that I'm taking today.
Okay, you better get
But
out
I
of here.
made sure that I would be fresh for the one with you, and haggard and fatigued for the other one. Yeah, thank you. But thank you for sparing the time, and I'm sorry you didn't say anything as crazy as I had hoped. But
I'm at my best, and I'm at my freshest in the morning, so you should try to schedule one.
We should do it in the evening.
Screw up.
Yeah, well, next time we will then.
Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
See ya.